The majority of my work occurs in pagan spaces, whether online or at festivals, conferences, and other events. And I'm really grateful that I get to work in a field that I love and that my career brings me into contact with so many other fascinating people doing the work of rebuilding or just flat out building diverse pagan religions. One thing that happens when you spend a lot of time in specific cultural spaces is that you bump up against larger currents of thinking within that smaller culture, ideas that repeat across presenters and groups. And one concept I've repeatedly encountered is the idea that we need to re-enchant the world. This takes different forms depending upon the person speaking or the group in question, but the overall theme is that we need to make more places magical. We need to make more places spiritually special in some way. I do think I understand the core of what's motivating this idea of re-enchantment. The Christian conversion shifted sacrality, the inherent holiness of something, from the landscape and the other than human persons around us into specific buildings and contexts. A force that our human ancestors once encountered regularly as part of simply living in a given region became restricted. Transcendental experiences began to only be recognized or tolerated or allowed if they occurred within fairly narrow confines. Revelations were acceptable if they occurred during a church service or on a specific feast day, or to someone who was considering taking the vows of a novitiate in a Christian religious order. The idea that sacrality was not in the landscape, but contained within human-made structures and systems became pervasive. It is no longer possible to fully disentangle the influence of Christianity on the wider culture of the United States or on the smaller and more specific culture of contemporary paganism. This push for re-enchantment is an example of that influence and the way it leaves its mark on everything it touches. What makes something holy or magical isn't the category, the location, or item falls into, or what it's physically made out of. What makes something holy is our relationship with it. The trees have as much sacrality as they ever did. Sacred groves were traded for cathedrals, sometimes literally when an invading religion built its temple on top of an already sacred site. What changed was us, how we thought of those previously sacred places, and then the actions we performed when we were near them. The drive toward re-enchantment can swing too far as well. The other extreme of the pendulum's arc is a form of pantheism where all places and objects are equally holy. And this is not quite what people are reaching for either. If everything is special, then nothing is. We do know on an instinctual level that certain places can be more sacral, more holy than others. I think the drive toward re-enchantment is a piece of deep cellular memory, reaching toward the surface and struggling against a system that just doesn't support it. Most people do desire contact with the numinous. We seek connection with that which is greater than ourselves. We know that the sort of spiritual experience we crave is less common in our living room, but for pagans and many others, the standard options of churches and temples and mosques don't work. I have a lifelong love of ancient history and often look to early civilizations for answers and ideas. Holy places really ran the gamut in the ancient world. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, sacred groves of trees appear to have been one form of holy place. Cenotes are deep natural sinkholes and caves full of water that were and are sacred to the Maya people of Latin America. Here in the United States, certain mountains were and are sacred to some of our First Nations tribes. Caves appear to have often been sacred places, up to and including for our Neanderthal ancestors. Human-created structures are also part of that ancient landscape, though. Locations like Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe spring to mind. With all of these locations, whether naturally formed or human created, a big part of how we know they were religious centers is through the archaeological remains. All of them hold the residues and traces of offerings, unusual or valuable items that were left by the people who interacted with these locations. Jewelry and other human-made objects, food, plant residue from species that do not occur within that locality, and more. What made these places sacred was not their specific form in nature or a form they were given by human hands. What made these places sacred was the relationship between place and people. And it was the series of actions repeated many times over many years that formed the basis of the relationship. A single precious stone in an archaeological site could simply be something that was lost or dropped. A religious center is denoted by the layers upon layers upon layers of offerings present. The relationship between place and people unfolded over time, and it was regularly enforced. And this is the other thread of Christian influence that can be difficult to untangle. When people are attempting to deconstruct internalized Christian norms and ideas, they sometimes throw out more than is helpful. The mechanism of going to a specific location more than once and performing actions that increase closeness with the human and other than human persons that are present in that space is consistent across religions. Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on this mechanism. No religion does. We can go to the mountain and lay flowers upon the stones. We can go to the cenote and offer valuable objects to the spirits deep in the waters. We go to the caves and tuck sacrifices into the sacred darkness of the stone, and in contemporary times, we go to church. We offer prayers and donations to this conception of the sacred. Sacrality is determined by relationship. Relationship is determined by actions. The world does not need to be re-enchanted, but we do. Mm-hmm. So how do we re-enchant ourselves? How do we find the holy in the landscape more readily? We must consciously choose repeated actions that foster connection with places we feel are special. We need to expand that idea of specialness to larger scale sacrality as well as smaller. And we need to change the actions that support our relationships with special places. Many people already engage with a pattern that is similar to our shared species history of visiting holy sites. I have friends that go to the ocean once a year and for whom this is a vital, not to be missed part of their yearly cycle. I know many people who walk specific paths in the woods, visit particular boulders and trees, sit beside certain parts of flowing streams or waterfalls again and again and again and again. I think we have the presence part down. Most of us already have a handle on what this kind of special place can mean. A place we go every year without fail. A place we go to when we are struggling or trying to make a decision. A place we go out of remembrance for others. Entering into relationship with such a place isn't simply a matter of showing up, though. And this is where some familiarity with pantheism and animism can be helpful. Whether we've done it consciously or not, most of us already have places that do feel special. The next step is allowing our understanding of these places to become more open. If a place we love is also holy, is also inspirited, then the relationship shifts from simply showing up and witnessing to engaging with the inspirited presence there. We have examples from all over the world to inform how this could work. A relationship with a holy place usually begins with a gift, something we bring with us specifically for the spirits of a certain place. The days of carrying pouches of frankincense and myrrh are fortunately far behind us, but establishing a relationship through kindness and generosity remains. An offering can take many forms. Perhaps it's a poem you love or one that you wrote that you read aloud to the spirits there. Perhaps it's an offering of clear water from a dedicated water bottle. Even better if you speak a blessing over the water as it flows into the earth. Perhaps the offering is labor, picking up trash or pulling invasive species. Perhaps the offering is ecologically appropriate food for some of the species there. There are many possibilities. What's most important is the idea of gifting or offering, of providing something to a holy place that represents how you feel about it. The next part is something we generally already do, witnessing or listening, spending time in contemplation or prayer. What changes when we shift perspective and open to the sacrality of a place is how we listen. Similarly to the openness that allows a space to be spiritually special, we open to the possibility of messages, information, and ideas that fall into non-logical, non-linear, or non-rational ways of knowing. We consciously disarm the part of the mind that loves logic and rules and absolutes, and we allow a more imaginative, intuitive, and empathetic part of the mind to take over. As a practicing mystic who also operates within the practical daytime world, holding the messages we receive in mystical moments gently is a good approach. An insight can be non-logical and also very powerful. A message can be important for us individually, but not necessarily something we need to interrogate or share. Mysticism and connection with that which is greater than ourselves becomes more comfortable the more we practice. So if you decide to experiment to opening to the sacrality of a place, go gently and slowly. Allow yourself time to feel into this new way of being in relationship. Good friendships are a balance of speaking and listening and then reflecting on what we've heard in order to continue a meaningful conversation. This is true for building a relationship with the sacrality of a place as well. We allow revelations and transcendental moments, insights and ideas to settle in our minds. We contemplate them gently, allowing for new and different questions or avenues of thought when we return to that sacred site. The last step, of course, is repetition. That which is fed increases. Our sense of connection and closeness to a special place deepens every time we visit. The potential for transcendental experiences expands with every offering, every moment of contemplation, every minute spent with a place that we experience as special. Another aspect of finding holiness within the landscape that was more common in the pre-Christian world was the idea of large holy sites and smaller ones. For the ancient Germanic people, the sacred grove at the temple in Uppsala, Sweden, was incredibly important as a site. It was visited as part of the religious cycle of a life in that time period. However, the landscape surrounding people in that culture also contained smaller sacred sites. Trees, where all members of the family buried the placentas of newborn children, connecting the tree to the line of the family and protection of the farmstead. Boulders and small hills or mounds where offerings were placed regularly to support a good relationship with the local spirits. Waterfalls, springs, and streams that were likewise honored with offerings and sought out for guidance or help on a more regular basis. This is probably the hardest thread to detangle. Deconstruction is challenging. It requires a shifting mindset. And if even the pagans are trying to enchant something that is already fully enchanted, then you know the programming runs very, very deep indeed. Concentrating sacrality into cathedrals resulted in a mindset that can't even fathom or allow for the idea that something under our noses, something we interact with or are physically near pretty much every day, might be holy. If we are going to save this beautiful, broken world for our grandchildren and for their grandchildren, one of the most useful things we do is begin the work of shifting perspective. One of the most useful things we can do is rebuild the relationship between humans and other than human persons. One of the most useful things we can do is begin to see the real and spirited, sacred places that surround us. Once we shift our perspective, the actions follow. Sacrality is determined by relationship. Relationship is determined by actions. This is how re-enchantment actually works. So, where does holiness live in the landscape for you? And how do you want to build a relationship that nourishes that connection?